What's up YouTube? This is XIII and welcome to my channel. Today we're going to be talking a little bit about the 2020 Yamaha MT-03. This is a 600 mile review. Just got the servicing done on this, and if you're new to this channel, I'm a beginner rider with very limited experience. I've only been riding for about 4 months now, so this is kind of my perspective on this. Before we get started, I have a background in science, so my mind is very methodical. So today I'm going to give you guys some pros, some cons, what I like best about the bike, what I wish was different, and then kind of dive into a little bit about who this bike is for and my overall thoughts. I guess to start off, we can talk a little bit about some basic specs of the bike. It has inverted fork front suspensions. It has LED lights all around. It comes in two colorways, at least here in the States from what I saw. It's this one, which is the matte black, or black. It has some matte coloring on it. It also has some gloss paint, as you can see here. This part is matte and this part is gloss, and so it also comes in a ice fluo colorway, which is kind of a gray bike with some red wheels. I mean, other than that, it gets about 50 to 60 miles per gallon on average per Yamaha. It weighs like 376 pounds wet from Yamaha. That's based on Yamaha's website, and I can definitely attest to that. It is a very light bike. It's a 300cc bike, or I guess technically it's a 321. However you want to say it, I just kind of think of it as a 300. And so it makes about 37 horsepower and about 20 foot-pounds of torque. Let's hit the road and talk about the pros and cons. Alright, let's start with the pros. Pro number one definitely has to be the price. You can buy this brand new for $4,599, and for an entry-level bike, I think that's great. I was able to pick this up out the door for about $5,200, and that's with California taxes. Pretty impressive, I might say. Next up, we definitely have the engine. It sounds good, it's smooth, and it has Yamaha reliability. Like, what more could you ask for? You just have to hop on and get going. That's it. Easy and simple. Then after that, we definitely have the flickability and the lightweight nature of this bike. It is so easy to just toss it around a turn. If you're trying to weave, which I'll demonstrate once this light turns green, but yeah, it's something I've enjoyed a lot about this bike. And I think from a beginner rider's perspective, because it's lightweight and it's easy to flick around, it makes it really fun to ride as well. And you can weave around like however you want, just toss it in, kind of like this. It's very light. After that, we definitely have the transmission. The gears, they shift like butter. The gears just slide into the forks. I think the only time, I guess it's just for me personally, but the only time it gets jerky is because of my lack of experience, my lack of skill, whatever you want to, call it. But when the gears do slide into the forks perfectly and I'm able to get a perfect shift, it just feels so good. It is butter. Gotta talk about the ergonomics. It's comfortable, you're upright, my back's not bent over, there's no pressure on my wrists, very easy to manage. So if you're going to be using this as a way to commute, I think it's great. And kind of a secondary pro with the ergonomics is because you're so upright, I have really good vision, like right here. And the way I use this bike is I'm basically using it to commute to work. And so having good vision is really important for me, because the further that I can see, the more confident I feel. And you know, coming from a beginner's rider perspective, I think confidence and gaining that confidence early or as fast as possible is very important. So I think the vision aspect is definitely a pro. Because it's on the shorter side, I'm able to plant my feet really well whenever I come to a stop, and that, you know, makes it a lot more easier to manage and control. And where I found this to be especially helpful is when I'm practicing and learning my slow speed maneuvers. That's where it's really been key for me. And because it's a lower ride height, I'm about 5'11", 5'10", and so even with my height, you know, I might be on the taller side, but with others who are shorter, I think they'll find the ride height to be really helpful in really learning those slow speed maneuvers and, you know, having that confidence and manageability when you're coming to a stop. Another pro about this bike would definitely have to be the suspension. And this one kind of has a caveat, because when I say suspension, I'm specifically talking about the way I'm using the bike most of the time, which is for commuting. The suspension is soft, it absorbs bumps really well, and it makes for a comfortable ride on my commute. And like I mentioned, this is a caveat, which I'll kind of talk about a little bit later in the video as well. And then last but not least, you know, looks. This is a very subjective one, but in my personal opinion, I think this bike looks great. People have kind of described it as having kind of a Transformers vibe. When I first saw the bike, I thought the front end really looked like a praying mantis. Do you guys know what that is? That's what it really reminded me of, and I personally think it looks great, especially in this black colorway. And now, nothing is without flaws, right? And this bike is definitely no exception. So let's move on to the flaws, or the cons, I should say. First off, let's just bring it right back to the suspension. As I mentioned, the suspension is a pro as a commuter. If you're using this bike as a commuter, when I took this bike up to the mountain the other day, on the mountain roads where, you know, they're not as well paved, this bike was definitely not confidence inspiring. And so when I was going through the turn, it gets a tad bit bouncy, to be honest, and that's really, it didn't really instill confidence in me. And as a beginner rider, you know, things got a little bit more sketch, so I basically just had to slow down. I'm sure if you're a more experienced rider, you know, you could probably handle something like that, but it's not, overall, it's just not a very confidence inspiring suspension. What I want to talk about is the torque on this bike. You know, when I got this bike, the whole MT line that Yamaha is doing now, MT stands for Master Torque. I expected the torque to be down low in the range, but it's actually very up there in the range. I think it's around like 8,000 or 9,000 RPM is where you have max torque. And you know, to me personally, I expected it to be down below, because Master Torque, you want the torque to be down low to have that jump, right? But I think I can definitely see where Yamaha was coming from and why they decided to put it up higher in the range. I guess the more torque you have, the easier it is to do power wheelies, right? But who this bike is made for, or who they're marketing it towards, it makes sense why they wouldn't want it to be down low, because they don't want people doing accidental power wheelies and then losing control and then crashing, etc., etc., right? So it makes sense, but you know, it wasn't something that I expected, but I can see why they did it. Another con of this bike is definitely the seat. yes, the bike is comfortable, but when I took it out for a 2-3 hour ride the other day, it was definitely not comfortable. The suspension was great on the freeway, but the seat was not that good. My behind was hurting, it was sore, and it was not a good feeling. So if you're someone that's planning to use this for, you know, long commutes like that, the stock seat is not great, but it's an easy fix. You could definitely get an aftermarket seat and go from there. I've definitely seen a lot of people change their seats out, so it's not something unheard of. And if you're into the long commute and you like this bike, then it's an easy fix for you. The last con I have about this bike is definitely the throttle tube. It is very, very long. It takes forever to get to wide open throttle. And for me, like when I'm on the freeway, that can be really tiring because I constantly have to adjust my wrist positioning. Or even here, let me just demonstrate real quick. If you do that, that's wide open throttle. Like your wrist has to be bent that far. And it's definitely uncomfortable for me, but I can see why Yamaha did it. Once again, bringing it back to who the market audience is for this bike. With the throttle tube being that long, it's definitely easier to control and easier to manage, especially for beginner rider with, you know, very limited experience. You could easily just replace it with the R6 throttle tube, the Yamaha R6 throttle tube, and that's a lot shorter. It's an easy fix, so it's not too big of a deal, but definitely a con in my eyes. And that's it for the pros and cons. Let's head back and talk a little bit more about the bike, about what I like best, what I wish was different, and, you know, kind of my overall thoughts on this bike. Back. I hope they don't kick us out of this church parking lot. What have I enjoyed the most about this bike so far? Definitely gonna have to be the flickability. Is that even a word? It's just how flickable and maneuverable this bike is. I always thought going into motorcycling, the number one thing that I enjoy the most would be the speed, right? But that quickly changed when I saw how fun it was to just toss this bike around. It was great, and that's definitely my favorite thing about it. What I wish was different would probably have to be the lack of a windscreen right here. And yeah, I know it's a naked bike, and by windscreen I don't mean it for wind protection. I just mean aesthetically, I kind of like the look of like a mini windscreen. I know Yamaha sells one, so I probably have to look into it, see what they have, but thinking about picking one up. And who knows, what if it makes a difference with the wind, even if it's a little bit. There might be a review coming up on that. We'll see. Overall, now that I'm past the 600 mile mark, just got the servicing done, I'm really excited to see what this bike can do. Now that I don't have the guilt of, you know, wailing on it all the time, looming over me, since it's finally past that initial service. So who is this bike for? If you're an experienced rider, you've been riding for a long time, I mean, you may be disappointed by this bike. If you're a rider with zero experience or very minimal experience, this is a great beginner bike, hands down. You cannot deny that. Another person that this bike might be for is that if you used to ride for a long time and now you're just coming back into motorcycling, I think this would also be a really good motorcycle for you. And then on the flip side, regardless of how much experience you have, if you're living in a city, like a metropolitan city, you just need something quick and easy to kind of get around town, I think this bike is great. It's easy to ride, it's flickable, it's comfortable, it definitely has enough power for, you know, city streets, so I think it's also great for that. Plus it gets great gas mileage, so that's tough to beat. Brings us to the end. Overall, what are my thoughts? I was cross-shopping this between the MT-03 or the Yamaha R3, right? And so the MT-03 is basically a naked version of that. And so if really comes down to what kind of riding you're doing. If you're looking more for like a comfortable commuter, I think the Yamaha MT-03 over the R3 for sure. Not to say that the R3 isn't comfortable. I think it was pretty comfortable for a sport, you know, a sport bike, but the MT-03 is definitely more comfortable. If you're the type of person that's doing more highway riding, freeway riding, and you definitely want that wind protection, then that's a case for R3 over the MT-03. Either case, you can customize the bike for sure. The wind aspect, you can get like a really big windscreen for the MT-03 and go that route. Really up to you, but those are just, you know, kind of my initial thoughts on this. And like I mentioned, that brings us to the end. If you liked what you saw, please drop a like, comment down below if you have any questions about this bike, or if you yourself have an MT-03, let me know. And yeah, please hit the subscribe button. And I have a lot of cool ideas, fun ideas for this channel. So if you're interested in motorcycles, consider subscribing. If not, stay safe, stay blessed, ride on, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace. If you guys stayed till the end, here's a mini pool for you guys. And that's why having good vision is important.